Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju and Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy. So Western Conference, it's so deep. There's so many good teams, so many stars, a lot going on. Got a little bit disappointing with news of like injuries within the Western Conference. Obviously Zion, I believe Russ had to leave the game a little bit last night with ankle injury. Hope he's okay. There's really only four teams we can eliminate off the bat when it comes to this conference. Suns, Grizzlies, T-Wolves, and the Thunder, who are probably going to have to unload Chris Paul's contract at some point. So with that said, Dre, you want to go 8 through 1 as far as your potential playoff team or your playoff teams as you see them finishing?
Yeah. So I'll work my way up. I guess some of my honorable mentions is what I'll start with. I think the Mavericks, the Pelicans, and the Kings are going to be tough and a lot tougher than some people think. I know the Kings have sort of been the butt of the joke for, probably the last decade, maybe two. But I think they actually do have a tough team that you're not going to want to play if, let's say, your starters are needing rest or you're a little bit banged up, right? Or even if you're just on a tough road trip, I don't think you're going to want to see them. The Pelicans so far have looked good to me. If Zion's healthy, and I have questions about that, right? Like he's I've heard almost 300 pounds or something and jumping around, and he's got a knee injury. We know that he had injuries last year. Can he stay healthy? I don't know at that weight. I think he needs to lose weight, but he's good. And then the Mavs, right? They're going to have two All-Stars with two European All-Stars, I should say, with Luka Doncic and the unicorn that they got from New York. So they're my honorable mentions. Next up, so in the 8th spot, I've got the Spurs, in my opinion. The 7th spot, I got the Blazers. The 6th spot, I have the Warriors. The 5th, I'm going with the Utah Jazz. 4th, I think the Los Angeles Lakers. 3rd, I've got the Houston Rockets. So it'll be fun, those two teams battling out, like we said. 2nd, the Nuggets. And then 1st, Los Angeles Clippers.
Okay, so, let's start off with the teams you kind of have on that bubble right now. So we have the Mavericks, we have the Pelicans, the Kings. So you're right. It's going to be interesting to see. The most exciting team out of that bunch right now for me is going to be the Pelicans. I loved what I was seeing in preseason out of them. Zion's a lot of fun to watch. He's the real deal, but he's hurt. Yeah. It sucks that he's hurt. I was looking forward to Tuesday night being able to turn on my TV and see Zion Williams. And there is no other reason I would watch a Pelicans-Raptors game besides that right now. No disrespect to you, Pascal. I know you got paid, but you're not the star of the game. It was going to be Zion right now.
Even Kyle Lowry, right? Nobody cares that. Kyle Lowry's been an all-star, but it's Zion Williamson.
Yeah, we just want to see how it looks. It's a new different kind of athlete that we're seeing out there on the court with the way that guy is so nimble on his feet, able to move around at that frame. But that frame's already having a little bit of pushback right now when it comes to his body stability and trying to stay on the court. And this is his rookie year. So it's a little scary. I don't anticipate his shoe blowing out on the court each and every time he plays. But I do expect there's going to be some times where he's just going to miss a 10 to 20 game stretch every now and then just because of a little tweak or twinge in his knee or his ankle or something lower body extremity wise.
Yeah, and I think the thing about Zion, so he plays in some ways very efficiently when it comes to scoring, right? Like his scoring percentage is very high just because he's constantly going for dunks and lobs and stuff like that. But then with that comes he has to use a ton of energy and he's jumping up and down, right, to make all of his points. He doesn't have that great of a jump shot from even within the arc, let alone from outside the arc. I think he can shoot a little bit, but when you're playing just athletic, right, which he is an athlete and he's a freak of nature athlete, everybody knew that, but you're jumping up and down every single time. You weigh 300 pounds and then you have the force of gravity pulling on you. I think you're right. I think there's the possibility that he doesn't stay healthy and, there's some major health concerns for him being this heavy as a rookie.
Well, with the team constructed around him, I definitely like how they're set up, though. You do talk about stuff like lobs. Lob City is back between him and Lonzo, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
With the way that Zoe can pass that ball, I think that's a perfect match made in paradise. And then they went out there and acquired J.J. Redick this year. I love J.J. Redick as a player. He's one of the better, most efficient shooters of all from the behind the arc of all time. And fun fact about J.J. Redick, his teams have never made the play or missed the playoffs. So maybe the Pelicans may still just get in there yet, just on the backs of their legendary three-point shooter.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, right? As JJ Redick, he provides that floor spacing that allows Zion to get into the lane and be able to score all his points right around the basket, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody's able to shut down Zion, he can just dish it out. JJ Redick's right there, and he's going to hit you with a dagger three, right?
Holiday's a guy. Holiday's a dog as well, too. I like this team. It's a good young team, well coached. They're going to compete. I don't want to completely dismiss the Mavericks or Kings, too, right now. De'Aaron Fox, he really showed up last year. Marvin Bagley had a pretty decent year. I'm still salty about those two not being on Team USA when it came to the World Cup. But that's not going to take away from anything as far as them being able to make it to the 7 or 8 seeds potentially and then get bumped in the first round because, hey, they could have used that extra time in Team USA camp. But I'm excited, too, to see this Mavericks team as well. Porzingis back on the court. We haven't seen him since that ACL injury. Mm-hmm. I wonder – I'm looking forward to that first matchup against the Knicks. That's like one of those, like, on my calendar bookmark moments because I kind of want to see him lay it on him. And so it's interesting. Mark Cuban has developed a team. He wanted to veer away from the classic draft from the NCAA system that's been in America for the last few decades. And he's going out of his way to get these European stars. As he says, they're better, more equipped for the NBA challenge. So this is where we're going to put it to the test. Can these guys really compete within the Western Conference?
Yeah, no, and I'm really excited for it. And we saw that the Europeans, right? They know how to play ball. We were talking about the World Cup, right? And obviously America didn't win it. Now, granted, we didn't have our best players like everybody else did, but still, like Europeans can play ball, and they've got 2 of the best Europeans, right, on this team. And we sort of already know as long as Porzingis can come back from that injury and continue to play like he has been, or like he has in the past at least. And then you have Luka Doncic, right? Like that dude is just fantastic. He's a phenomenal basketball player. I think they're going to be a really interesting team to watch.
Okay. Next, so let's start getting into your actual playoff teams you have here. So we're going to start with the 7 and 8 seeds right now. So the Spurs. Like you said, best coach in the NBA with Greg Popovich there. Their team, they picked up some guys in there like with Marcus Morris, who's always been a good solid 4 there. They have, obviously they have DeRozan. It's kind of an interesting constructed team. Aldridge is there. I don't know. Like, I don't buy into necessarily the talent, but if any coach is going to be able to fit these pieces together, it would be Popovich. I kind of, my personal thing, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me the Spurs missed it just because I don't think the talent could keep up with the Western Conference at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But good coaches, they tend to manage to pull these kind of rosters together.
Yeah, and I don't remember the last time the Spurs missed the playoffs. I'm sure there's been a time in recent history.
I think I've heard this one. I want to say it was all the way back in 98.
Yeah, and which is just an insane stat, right? So we talked about the JJ Redick's teams never missing the playoffs. Like these Greg Popovich teams never miss the playoffs either, right? And you're exactly right. I think the talent, I don't know if it's there just to compete at the level of the other teams in the Western Conference. And that's why I think the teams that we have in the top 8, right, especially your top 6 teams, they're just so talented. I just don't think that there's any way that they miss the playoffs. Now, they might move around, right? Maybe the Clippers fall to 2 or, the Lakers fall to 5 or 6. But there's just so much talent in the West. And the Spurs, I don't think have that, especially Aldridge is getting older. DeMar DeRozan's always been good, but obviously he's never been the guy to make his team like superior to everybody else. And so I think you're exactly right.
DeRozan's going to go down in the Hall of Very Good when his career is over. Like Well,
Yeah.
NBA Hall of Fame is kind of fast and loose with who they induct, but
hmm And he is a fantastic player, right? Like, this is not a knock on DeMar DeRozan. I just don't think he's the piece that will get you an NBA championship.
I mean,
And there's
we
a lot
saw,
of guys like that.
but perfect example. Look what Toronto did in just the one season he was gone.
hmm Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So moving into the Blazers. So Dame Dalla really showed off that he can lay down those bars, but can he actually elevate this team in the postseason? We saw him basically end the super team, loosely super team in OKC with that killer half court shot that he had. But then they get swept by the Warriors. Swept. And this, keep in mind, Kevin Durant was out that entire series.
Yep. And Boogie, too.
And Boogie. And, yeah, just classic Splash Bros. Klay Thompson, Steph Curry combined to knock this team out in 4. So I guess I don't know how much belief I have in the Blazers whenever I see that. Because if there was ever a time for them to elevate themselves into potentially being a championship team, it was last year. It was wide open for them to do it.
Yeah, no, I think their ceiling's limited. I also noticed that the Blazers, they play a small ball, right? But last year, the team that's better at small ball than the Blazers is the Warriors, right? And we saw how that ended up. But now, like, when you normally go with small ball, it's because your guards and your wings tend to have like just more skill than some of your big guys. But there's some teams that are big but still really skilled. And that's the thing, like, I like about the Lakers. They're big, but their bigs are all really skilled. Like, they can dribble the ball. Anthony Davis can dribble the ball. LeBron James can dribble the ball, right? The Clippers are also a really long team. That's what I think helped the Raptors win is, like, you have guys like a Kawhi Leonard that are just really freaking long. And, again, they're still really skilled. And so small ball only helps you if your small players are more skilled than everybody else, right?
Yeah, you're right. They are terribly lined up against this top tier in the Western Conference. And it's a shame because, I do like Damian Lillard. I think that he's one of my more fun players to watch in the league. It's going to be interesting to see long-term if he does end his career with Portland. Because I know that he has expressed multiple times that's where he wants to be. This is the team he wants to stick it out with. And he's been the first to criticize some of these players whenever they go to form up these super teams. So is he going to be a man of his word and stick it out with Portland long term? Or is he going to fall into this trap where I need to win a title for my legacy? Is Portland going to get me there? I don't think it is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think Portland, it's just when it comes to the NBA, like we talked about this a little bit in baseball, that you could accomplish quite a bit and not being in a big market and having, a roster that isn't the highest paid. But in the NBA, it's just different, right? Like the Golden State Warriors sort of became a big market, and the Bay Area has been growing. It's been booming. The Cleveland Cavaliers just happened to be good because they got one of the best players ever to be born in Ohio, right? Like that just happened. But other than that, it's usually your Celtics who've been a historic franchise. So even if Boston's not the biggest city, like the historic franchise people want to play with, it's been the Lakers, right? Or your other big time either franchises or big cities. And
Miami, zero state income tax, stuff like that.
Yeah, like all that big stuff, right? And even Miami, right? They needed sort of a super team to form down there to win it. And so with Portland, I just don't ever really see them getting to that level.
Yeah. Well, let's move into this next grouping here. So we have the Warriors and the Jazz. So the Warriors, obviously, let's see, 5 straight trips to the finals. Unfortunately, that's probably going to end this year. They have a championship mentality when it comes to players like Steph Curry, but that's not going to be – that's sentiment. It's not going to be expressed by his number 2. I love what D'Lo did with the Nets last year, but viably, I don't think he's going to be able to keep up, or certainly he's not the most efficient three-point shooter, even though he can shoot threes. And I don't think that really plays to the Warriors' strengths, who who I'm looking at really this season is going to be Steve Kerr, because it's long been speculated how good of a coach is Steve Kerr. Because obviously he's had the most talented roster in NBA history the last 4 years, or at least the most talented starting lineup in NBA history the last 4 years since he's been there. So we've always had that kind of like question of his true acumen as a play caller. Mm-hmm. Well, this is going to be his time to step up. If he can still get this team to the playoffs, I don't know if Klay Thompson is going to be ready. ACL injuries. In terms of the NFL, we've seen players come back from them, but I don't think it's nearly as strenuous as it is for a basketball player to have that type of injury, at least in my mind. I may be wrong. I'm not a doctor by any means, but that's kind of how I see it in a game where you're constantly having to jump up and down and really put a little bit of torque into that thing. I'm a little bit worried about Klay Thompson's ability to come back specifically in a playoff run.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't know if you even want to risk that if you're the Warriors this year, right? Like, obviously, Klay Thompson's one of your max level players. You're paying him pretty good money right now. And he's been a great player for you. But if you rush him back into this playoff situation where you might be the fifth or the sixth seed, right? Like, so that means you're going to have tough matchups no matter what. So if you're on the sixth side, you're going to have to go against the 3 and then the 2. And then, possibly the 1 after that. And do you think Klay Thompson's going to be that big of the difference maker, especially coming off, fresh from an ACL injury? In my opinion, it's just better like, hey, we'll just rest you the entire year, right? Unless the doctors say, hey, 100%, like he's good to go and we can have him playing, then I'd say, okay, if the doctors say it and Klay wants to get back out there, but I just don't see how it does that much good for him. And then, like you said, the D'Lo-Steph backcourt that they have right now, it's offensively, I think, will be very fun to watch. Like, they're very good shooters. D'Lo, like you said, isn't the most efficient at threes, but I think he is developing as a guard. But defensively, though, like, they are going to be so bad. I mean, there is even a video, and I think Steph was taking it easy on this, like, high school or middle school kid, but he got blown by like a high schooler and couldn't play defense on a high schooler, right? And again, I'm sure Steph was taking it easy, so I'm not gonna like call him out and be like he sucks at defense, but he's not the best defender, and neither is D'Lo, right? And so I think there's a lot of holes right now, and obviously they lost, Kevin Durant, arguably number 1, number 2, or number 3 in the world. Right?
Well, not just Durant, they also lost Iguodala. They also lost Pat Livingston. They lost Sean Livingston as well. And so they lost a lot of size on this team right now. Didn't even Kayvon Looney sign somewhere else too, if not mistaken?
Yeah, I don't remember. And then you're right. Like Draymond Green too, that's another thing, is he's we've seen him start to like regress and go downward. I think that might be due to age. But like if Draymond can't even, play at the same level that he has been in the past, that's another thing, that hurts him.
Okay, I was mistaken. Kayvon Looney is still alive and well on the Warriors roster, but still, that's a lot of depth to lose and a lot of length to lose in an NBA where you have these mountains of teams like the Lakers, the Clippers, who defensively are just so stout. I think this team is just a poor matchup for those teams. Similarly, if I'm going to say that the Blazers match up poorly against these squads, I think I got to say the same thing about the Warriors right now. All right. Let's get into this next team here. So the Jazz have long been compared to the Boston Celtics. A lot of people have used the term that they're the Boston Celtics of the Western Conference when you consider you have a young team, young coach in Quinn Snyder, and fundamentally they've just been one of the better teams in basketball the last few years. But I actually kind of think you have them a little too high. I think fundamentally they're great, awesome, but eventually the fact that they don't really have a true star is going to bite them in the ass, and it always does in the playoffs in particular. So maybe actually you have them just right. They're a decent regular season team, so they'll get a decent seed, but they're probably a first-round exit for me because with how competitive this conference is and how many stars are in it, I just don't believe that Mike Conley is enough. I don't believe that Rudy Gobert is enough to get them over the hump.
Yeah, I think you're I think you're right. Like, I think they're a good team. And again, I'll say that they're going to be one of the teams you don't want to play on a night-to-night basis, right? Especially we know how bad Jazz fans can be when it comes to tormenting players, right? And talking to players. So being on the road, playing against this tough team, it is going to be difficult. But you're right. They're still, Donovan Mitchell had a really good first year, not as good of a second year, though still he's a decent player. We know he has it in him. Mike Conley, like, you're right. Is that really enough to put them over the hump? He's also 32 years old, right? So I don't know how much that will have an impact on him, but we all know what happens in sports. You tend to hit the end of your life pretty quickly when it comes to being a pro level athlete. And so I think they're exciting to watch. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up in the top 4. But at the same time, I have them out of it right now in 5 or 6 range.
Okay, so your top 4 seeds here. Lakers, Rockets, Nuggets, Clippers. A lot of movement between these rosters right now. Well, maybe not so much for the Nuggets. Actually, the Nuggets are kind of a surprise team in this grouping here. Certainly, like, the least exciting team to talk about in terms of how much roster movement has taken place. I don't want to completely disrespect Joker there. I think he's definitely one of the star players of the NBA, but I don't know if a center is enough to really carry a team anymore.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. But at the same time, he is a monster of a center, right? And he's unlike what a lot of people have seen in the past. So he's extremely good. I don't know if there's very many big men that can slow him down, and amongst these teams in the West, right? That are really good. And so I think it's going to be more of containing everybody else and just hoping the Joker doesn't put up more than 30 on you, which I don't think he will in a lot of cases. I think I see him in that like 25 points per game range or something like that. But I think it's the game plan against them is contain and keep everybody else down and let the Joker. He's sort of just going to do Joker things, right? And we already saw one Joker movie come out and people were panicked about it. I think you got to panic a little bit about this Joker too. I've seen people rank them as high as number 1 though. So,
well, I think the fact that he's their main guy, their lone guy, is going to catch up to them. I know they have other players. Don't get me wrong. They have Murray there, who some will argue was overpaid this offseason. But I think you do need a sidekick here. So this Joker needs a sidekick. He needs his Harley Quinn, unfortunately. And I don't think he really has one quite yet on this Nuggets roster. I think they're going to be, again, another case of a great regular season team, because we've seen LeBron teams and certainly the Rockets last year, like, ease up in the regular season, save up all their ammunition for the playoffs here. Mm-hmm. And I think they might even be able to live up to your projection here of the 2 seed right now, with that said. But I don't buy them as a playoff team, to be honest. I don't buy them as a championship team. That's maybe I'm going to be eating crow, but that's the way I see it.
No, I think you're exactly right. And that's the thing when it comes to the playoffs. So I think to get to the playoffs and to have a good record, right, you need the deep bench and stuff like that, just because there's a lot of games, 82 games, and having that deep bench can help you pull out some wins to get into the playoff spot. But when you're actually in the playoffs, right, you're mostly playing your starters the majority of the time, right? 75, 80% of the time, it's going to be your starters. And starters in the West are going to be all-stars. And when you only have one of them, you're at a disadvantage. So,
yeah. So, Lakers on the court, putting away all that other stuff we talked about earlier. It's headlined by 2 guys, LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And so far in preseason, these guys have looked really good together. I can't even front. I can't even lie about this. They're looking like a perfect fit. Hell, I even saw Skip Bayless talking about how good this team is. Skip Bayless. Skip was talking about how good this team is. And you know that just burned his soul to the inner core right there to give this Lakers roster anything but props with LeBron James on it.
Yeah. So I'm going to say I'm extremely excited, right? So the Lakers are my team. They have been. It's been a painful past few years. Even last year, A lot of people thought the Lakers were going to make the playoffs, which they were on a trajectory to do, and then they sucked, right? And so I am just ecstatic about this team. I think, their roster is deep. They've got the all-stars, right? They could potentially make it out of the West and go into the NBA championships. Like you said, LeBron James, Anthony Davis are fantastic. Kyle Kuzma didn't even play in the preseason, right? So you have last year's second best scorer. There's no way he's going to be the second best scorer this year just because you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. But Kyle Kuzma sort of being your third option or even fourth option because you have Danny Green is also there. They picked up some pretty good guards, right? Quinn Cook they took from the Warriors, which, we talked about them a little bit earlier. So that's another player that they had lost. We've got Alex Caruso. I wasn't too pleased with how much Rajon Rondo I saw in the preseason, to be honest. And that's one of the things that I think will hold this team back is that there's so many guys there, right? Your Dwight Howards, LeBron Jameses, Anthony Davis, Rajon Rondos, right? Danny Greens. These are all players that are deserving just because of their status of more time. But Rajon Rondo, right? Like, I don't think he's the level that he was playing when he was back in Boston. And yet you're almost forced to play him because of his name, because of who he is, and because of the personalities on this team, even if it's not what's best for the team, right? Like, even if, let's say, an Alex Caruso or a Quinn Cook would be better in that situation for you, you're still almost forced to play Rajon Rondo, right? Or maybe you'll be forced to play a Dwight Howard over a JaVale McGee when you should go with the JaVale McGee, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this team is ultimately going to be playing a different style of basketball than the rest of the league. They're going to be playing straight up bully ball, as it's called, like they're going to be using their size, their power to dominate other teams' rosters, especially a lot of these smaller teams ran by guards, like we're talking about with the Trailblazers or Warriors. It's just going to be interesting to see. So last year's problem for them was their lack of outside shooting. And I don't really think that they did a whole lot to change that this year. I mean, I think Quinn Cook is certainly developing as a three-point shooter. I do think that I've heard good things about Caruso's outside game from what I've heard. And sure, we've seen AD step out from time to time from behind the arc and nail some. But that's not going to be where they're going to be relying on. They're going to have to get in the paint and really just wreck teams from there, which is going to be interesting to see how they incorporate Anthony Davis into that 5 role that he is so resistant of going into.
Yeah. And honestly, I've heard a lot of, analysts say that the best lineup is going to be with Anthony Davis at the 5, but that's another issue, right? Is he's come out and been very outspoken that he will not play the 5 or does not want to play the 5. He would prefer not to do a lot of time there. And so, like I said, leading into, a little bit earlier with all your personalities and how do you manage that is Frank Vogel, he has to balance. Like you said, where do I put Anthony Davis? Is it best for my team to play him at the 5, or do I keep him at the 4, LeBron at the 3, and keep in, a JaVale McGee or Dwight Howard, right? Even though that's not the best situation, do I leave Rajon Rondo in? And so I think there's going to be a lot of those issues. The other thing that I think is going to be interesting is the point guard spot, right? Like, I don't think we have an outstanding point guard right now. And I know they've talked about LeBron James is going to run the point guard for a little bit. And I think that's probably more from an offensive thing, not so much from a defensive thing. LeBron James is not going to, he's not going to guard point guards. Like, he just can't keep up with them at his age. And so what are you going to do? Do you have Rajon Rondo, who has not been the greatest defensively? Like, he's sort of taken steps back. Alex Caruso kind of can, but he's also your lowest paid point guard on the roster, right? Quinn Cook's not very good defensively, but he's very good offensively. So, yeah, it's going to be a really interesting season for this team.
Over under 20 games for Frank Vogel.
I think he'll make it beyond that. I like what I've seen from Frank Vogel. I think he has a really good team that if he wins a championship, I'm not going to say it's because Frank is like a fantastic coach. It will be because of his team, right? Sort of like we were saying with Steve Kerr, that his team was just so good to get him a championship.
I'm just saying, if this team starts mediocre in any way, you already know what we're going to expect.
Oh, yeah. You'll be fired in an instant. And the thing is they forced Jason Kidd onto the staff. And I think the reason is as soon as Frank Vogel messes up, guess who's there, right? Boom. plug in Jason Kidd.
I never agreed with that setup. I still don't. I think it's going to hinder this team long term. But we got to move off them. All right, let's talk about these Rockets here. So, again, away from all the other stuff earlier, how is this team going to perform on the court? We have James Harden and Russell Westbrook teaming up together, Thunder 2.0. To be honest, I don't like it. I don't like him as a 3 seed. I feel like the Rockets going after Russ felt kind of like a desperate move to me. And maybe I'm just through with watching Russell Westbrook. I have Russell Westbrook fatigue because I'm tired of hearing how this guy has triple-double, and nothing to show for it. You're going to tell me a few years ago you're going to name him the MVP because of all these triple-doubles, and then he can't play basketball the next couple of years, then maybe something's wrong with this triple-double stat, and maybe it's just a meaningless, empty-calorie stat in the NBA.
Yeah. I mean, and it very well could be, right? Is that, and I think it depends. How are you getting your triple doubles? And a lot of people have argued that Russ, his triple doubles are sort of fool's gold in that he'll have he'll box out his own players to get a rebound, right? Or, in some ways he forces assists on you. And so I think you're right. I think the whole triple double machine, it's very impressive, right? Without a doubt. But at the same time, is it really contributing to actual wins, right? And something, more tangible besides your own stats. I don't know if there's evidence for that. The other thing that I have an issue with, right? If this didn't work and you had Kevin Durant on your team, like, what makes you think it's going to work now, right? Like,
oh yeah, no, this combination was entirely led by having a 7-foot freak who can shoot from anywhere on the court on your team. Not because of these two guys and working in tandem with each other. In fact, if you remember kind of right, like James Harden was more of a reserve role when he was back out there on the OKC Thunder. So, and then it only was whenever he got to Houston that he really became this ball dominant guard like he is now. And now you're adding another ball dominant guard like Russ in there. And not just one who's so dominant, who commands the ball so frequently and often, but one who is so inefficient with the ball. It's like painful to watch Russ shoot at this point because he'll still keep throwing those threes up there and they just don't hit. Like, to be less than a 30% shooter from deep right now at this point in the NBA, I almost wonder if he'd be best served just to take on a Ben Simmons type role and just never shoot him because he's legit hurting his team. And the worst part, he knows he's hurting his team. There's no way that he hasn't listened to any analysis over the last couple of years who said, dude, stop it. You are bad at this. And yet you keep hucking them up there just as much as any other shooter on the court.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you're exactly right, is that he's not a very good 3-point shooter. And I know that the league is going towards analysis, but like you can't force 3-point shooting on somebody that can't shoot 3-pointers. And shooting in general, I think Russ struggles with. And that's what I worry about is Russ's style of play. He relies so much on his athleticism. And he is a fantastic athlete. But similar critique to what we had with Zion, right, is that we're starting to see Russ get injured more and more. And eventually you're going to slow down. I think Russ is on the other side of 30 now. If I'm not mistaken, he might be 32. And so do you start to slow down? And if Russ's main thing is being athletic, now that you're old, slowing down, and injured, what value do you really have if you're not athletic and you can't shoot anymore,
Yeah, I mean, and the worst part is he's going to a team that is going to put him in this position that's going to force it on him. D'Antoni's strategy is simple and easy to know. Shoot the ball. Shoot the ball. Shoot the ball from deep. Keep laying it in there. Live by the 3, die by the 3. That is D'Antoni's philosophy, and he will take it with him to the grave. And he's adding in an element to this stew that won't necessarily work. It kind of reminds me a little bit like Carmelo Anthony in New York whenever he went into D'Antoni's system. Carmelo had some of his better seasons, but it still never felt like a great fit. And I think that's what we're going to see with Russ in this combination as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I have them as three. I think they're going to get the wins during the regular season. What's really interesting, I saw a lot of like computer analysis and like modeling simulation type stuff that also have them projected. I've even seen some computer models that have them projected as high as one, but I just don't see them being a championship caliber team.
If you told me they were the 6th seed, I would not be surprised. And if you tell me this team lost in the first round, I probably wouldn't be as shocked as most people probably would be.
Mm-hmm. Now, you know what I think is interesting, just real quick, going back to the Daryl Morey thing, is that might be their way to get rid of Daryl Morey, is to say, hey, we've fallen backwards in the playoffs, right? We're now down to the 6th seed. That's why we're firing you instead of all this China stuff.
I would accept that. You can definitely fire Daryl Morey in the grounds of he went out of his way to acquire Russ in this trade, which you can argue he had to get rid of that Chris Paul contract, which you can argue he gave Chris Paul that contract.
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
Maybe there is just some merit to fire Daryl Morey on a purely GM basis when you add those in combination with each other.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last team in the conference that we're going to finish up here. So the Clippers. I feel like the Clippers came in, extradited Kawhi out of Canada, and then out of nowhere come with this Paul George trade. I remember just looking on my phone. I was like, wait, what? Because it's like we didn't even know that Paul George was on the market. No one was even talking about Paul George getting traded. If anything, the OKC Thunder, we thought they were probably just going to move off Russ somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But no, they just completely dismantle their team. And it definitely speaks to how this player mobility thing has affected the NBA, where a player under contract for a couple more years can still say, oh, I demand a trade, and just somehow end up on a different roster. Contracts in the NBA, honestly, I've come to the realization, are meaningless.
Yeah, they don't mean a whole lot in the NBA. Real quick, let me just tell you how much of a kick in the balls this whole thing was for me, right? So I think it happened at like a Friday at like a midnight Western time, right? And so unless you're on the West Coast, you're probably in bed, right? Even if you are on the West Coast, you're probably in bed. And so I wake up to my phone and, I'm a Lakers fan. And then I see, oh, Lakers sign X, Y, and Z, like this player, that player, that player. And I knew right away, I was like, dang it, we did not get Kawhi Leonard. He must have chosen the Clippers, right? Or the Raptors, because we were holding out. And if we got Kawhi Leonard, that would have filled up our entire, cap space. So we couldn't have signed possibly all of those good players. And then I look and it's like, Kawhi signed with the Clippers. And I was like, all right, sucks. We're going to have to whoop up on Kawhi all year. And then you have a player that the Lakers had tampered to try to get, and he signs with your rivals that share the same building with you, and they stole your best free agent. Such a kick in the balls. I was pissed. I was so upset, and I was like, the Lakers never should have waited for Kawhi. And you could argue whether or not that was a good choice, but yeah, pissed me off.
You think you're upset? Just think of all the people in Seattle who thought they were getting a team because Steve Ballmer said if they didn't get Kawhi, they were probably going to move the franchise.
I know. Yeah. And then it screwed, on the other side, right? It's sort of screwed Toronto because they were holding out. Obviously, they thought they had a good chance at Kawhi too. But, pissed.
But when it comes to Kawhi and Toronto, that relationship is forged in blood. If you're a Toronto citizen, you can never hold anything against Kawhi. He brought your team out of the depths of just ineptitude for years. Mm-hmm. So with that said, okay, so Clippers, how far do I see this team going? The main thing that's going to be the challenge for any team that goes against this roster is you have two defensive studs with Kawhi and Paul George on this roster. Throw in Patrick Beverley, who's always been one of those like annoyances on the court, just always in your face. Like he was going after Kevin Durant hard. Granted, he gave up a 50-point game to Durant, but still, Patrick Beverley, I'll give him some props as a defender. So those three on the court at the same time are going to be a dangerous combination to have. I do worry, though. Paul George hasn't exactly been known as the most clutch player in the recent NBA history. I don't know do you think that Kawhi can take over this roster in the same way he did with Toronto and push them over the top to elevate himself even potentially over Paul George?
I think I think if there's a player that can do it, Kawhi's the player right now, right? Like maybe LeBron James of old, but Kawhi is good enough, I think. And like you said, they're some of the best defensive players. So I think it's going to help Paul George out a lot in that, in some of his previous roles, he's had to do all of the guarding of the best player, right, on the court. Now you can sort of flip flop them, right? So maybe you could put Kawhi Leonard on the better player one night, then Paul George, the next night or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to help. I think it will help Paul George, honestly. What I sort of worry about, though, is now that he's living in LA, like Paul George has said, like, that's where I want to be. I want to live in LA. I think you're right. Like, he was already unclutched. Now does he, like, not even care anymore, right? Because he's like, oh, I live in LA. Like, I'm living my best life. This is where I'm from. Doesn't matter whether or not I get a ring. And if I play hard, like, I'm on the beach with my family. Maybe he desperately does want to get a ring still and say, hey, I still have to do it for my legacy, and this is my best shot at doing it. But yeah, I still have some questions, but I think it will be better. I think the ability for him to be a clutch player has been increased now that he's playing alongside Kawhi Leonard.
Well, a lot of people will say too they have one of the better coaches in the NBA. Personally, and this may be a little bit of a hot take thing by me, I always felt Doc Rivers may be a little bit overrated as a coach.
Even though he brought you a ring?
Yeah, but the Celtics were also one of the worst teams in the NBA the year before they established the Big Three. And I think that you could credit that championship ring more to Danny Ainge bringing that talent together than, Doc Rivers basically sitting back and having that talent on his roster. Just fire him up and let him go.
Yeah, I can see that, right? Like when you have some of the best players in the world, like you just let them do their thing and you'll get you wins.
Especially too, because that was an era before big three star forming up left and right. Like the Lakers were the only real competition to the Celtics then, and clearly the Celtics dominated them when it came to that finals. Mm-hmm. It was only till the next year where the Lakers went out there, got Gasol, and then we decided, silly enough, to trade away Kendrick Perkins, that things are getting a little interesting. I'm going on a tangent, but anyway, my point is I don't think Doc is necessarily as good as people make him out to be. Clearly, like, he lost a lot of credibility with the whole Austin Rivers thing as well. So I guess we'll see how he's able to gel this team together. Clippers are kind of an interesting team. So, like, they're not – I'm learning as I'm talking about them. In a way, they're not the most exciting to talk about how this grouping. Maybe it's just because they've always been seen as the little brother when it comes to the LA teams. So now that we have to talk about them as legitimately a number one team, I guess I got to see it before I believe it. In the same way, when people keep telling me that the Knicks are one of the premier franchises in the NBA, I want to see it first before I can believe that the Clippers have really made a turnaround. Browns in the NFL too. We saw that was a much hyped, poor franchise that never really lived up to expectations.
Yeah. No, I can agree with you to some extent. Now, what I will say, though, is it's a lot easier to take one really good player in the NBA and change a franchise, right? Whereas the Browns obviously added, 3 good players and lost some depth at their line and are still really bad, right? So
yeah,
I think the Clippers will do a good job. I think they are lacking a little bit on their bench and depth, right? But I think they are prepared well for when they actually get to the playoffs.
I think it's just because maybe Kawhi hasn't never been one of the most vocal stars in the NBA. Paul George has never been one of the most vocal stars in the NBA, which, hey, they're great players. That's all you need. You don't need a guy who's loud and in your face and making terrible China comments like LeBron James.
All right. We'll leave it there.